And did you know that SCAD is the only university in Georgia that offers a festival that is solely devoted to gaming? I think that that is awesome. That is awesome. Now, coming from a background in TV production as well as motion media, I understand the importance of storytelling as well as game design. And great games contain more than just eye-catching graphics and animations. They offer us great characters that we can relate to. And that is what makes the gaming experience so remarkable. Today, I am honored to introduce someone who absolutely gets the importance of building fully realized characters and compelling stories in games. SCAD alumnus and senior game designer at Blizzard Entertainment, Harrison Pink.
SCAD is and always will be the OG, the original gamers. We pioneered our first game design programs in 2003. Do you believe that? Yeah. In gaming years, that's basically the Bronze Age. Well, just think about this. When SCAD launched our gaming program, Call of Duty and World of Warcraft didn't even exist. In fact, SCAD is the first university anywhere to offer a Master of Fine Arts degree in game development, and SCAD offers more courses in game design than any university on the planet. 66 unique courses created by SCAD just for our SCAD students. SCAD has 21 genius professors on 2 continents and more than 5,300 inventive alumni working at Big Fish, Blizzard, EA, Hi-Rez, Insomniac, and so many more, like Microsoft, Nintendo, Prism, Riot, and Rockstar. SCAD teaches every student one unforgettable truth. What matters more than coding, more than game theory, what ties everything together, from sound to scenic art, is story. And tonight's SCAD 40 honoree has built a career making games come alive through deeply human stories. SCAD family, Harrison Pink was a storytelling prodigy from Act 1 of his very own journey. When he was still a student, right where you are today, one of his final SCAD projects won Best Board Game at the 2007 Game Developers Exchange. Immediately after graduation, Harrison started designing game systems and stories at Thrust Interactive, right here in Atlanta, and then Telltale Games, where he worked on The Walking Dead 400 Days, one of the most imaginative, gripping, and best-written stories ever created for a video game. And today, Harrison works his narrative magic at the legendary studios of Blizzard, where SCAD has 40 alumni working. I think that's a coincidence with the SCAD 40th anniversary. Throughout his life and career, SCAD alumnus Harrison Pink is a genuine game changer.
Help me in welcoming Meg Lefauve.
And then you come back and you work with the director and you work with the producer and you get or an actor, if you're really lucky, is already on, and you're working with them, and then you kind of hand that to the studio. You have a meeting, they give you notes. Now I go away again for 2 months and work on it. Animation, you're in the studio every day with them. You're in a room. It's like TV, you're breaking it with multiple people around a table. So there's the director, there's the head of story, there's the co-director, and we're carding it every day. And then the storyboard artists come in, or I was on The Good Dinosaur and suddenly a design for some dinosaurs came in and I was like, well, I guess they have mullets, so that tells me a lot about their character. Or they moved something when we were working on Inside Out. They were like, yeah, John moved where long-term memory was. And I'm like, it's a road movie. You can't just move it. What's happening there? You can't just move it like this. And they were like, well, it's moved. So, you know, it's like, okay. You're really just part of a giant brain and team that's moving. And so it's so collaborative. Animation, all film, in my opinion, has to be behavior-based. But really in animation, they do not want to animate this, lips talking. Like, what are they doing? They want to animate gesture and something fun. And you know that you've got a good sequence if the storyboard artists are excited to get their hands on that, right? Because they want to draw that. That seems really fun to draw. If they're kind of like, you're like, oh no. No, they don't. They can't draw it. If they can't draw it, you're probably gonna have to rewrite it, right? Because they can't draw it. Like, you haven't actually dug down into it. So I learned a tremendous amount working in animation because I'm getting to write something and see it drawn, and does it work, does it not? Okay, it works as a sequence, but it went into edit and we put things on the other side, now it doesn't work anymore. Crap. It goes up, I thought it worked, we watch it with 350 people in a theater, I get 350 sets of notes, no joke. And then you go again, and at Pixar, in my experience, we see it, we get 350 sets of notes, we go to the brain trust, we all go have a drink, and then the next day, we start carding the movie again. You don't go back to your script. That script is done, card it, start over, go back to outline. So I've realized that's what I do now in live action. Between drafts, I always go back to outline, because chances are any symptomatic problem you have is rooting all the way back to your core story engine, which you really have to have a 30, as Andrew Stanton used to like to say, a 30,000-foot view of that, and that's an outline. So I always go back to outline, and I tell young writers who get upset about that idea, I'm like, well, if somebody buys your script and they hand it to another writer to write, what do you think they're gonna do? They're gonna outline. They're gonna come back and tell these deep core problems. So that's another big thing I learned, is you gotta go you can't just fix the top, you gotta go all the way back down to the bottom. Of course, certain sequences come back in, but they may not come back in the same way or for the same purpose. The relationship might be different there. So that's a really big thing that I learned in animation that I took over to live action.
Gaming Fest, we're going to continue the discussion about what is arguably the most important part of game development, and that is story. We do love incredible visuals, cool tech is always great, but studies have shown that there is a direct correlation between compelling narrative and game success. And so we want to talk about that today, because writing for games is different than writing film, television, novels, because the user is part of that narrative. And today's panelists are going to talk to us about how they use imaginative, strategic writing skills to connect with gamers across the globe. And so I don't want to talk anymore, I want them to. I'm going to bring them out. Please welcome Laura Jackman. She is a writer-producer for the critically acclaimed television series Get Shorty on Epix, and I believe now also on Netflix. And her game credits include Minecraft, Walking Dead, others. She was at Telltale for a while. Thank you, Laura. Next we have Pierre Charette, who is the co-founder of Ad Hoc Studios. He's known for Batman and Tales of the Borderlands. Come on out, Pierre. And finally, Micah Wright, who some of you met earlier this week. He did a couple of classes. Micah is the current chair of the Writer Guild of America, the WGA's Video Game Caucus. He has multiple credits in film and television, and many game credits, including, I believe, Looney Tunes, Call of Duty, and many others. This is our great panel. Join me in welcoming them.
And I think a good mix of stuff. For me, always over technical proficiency, I'm looking for voice, and I'm looking about what makes that writer really unique and exciting. From a more practical standpoint, in terms of just chops, I am looking for a dialogue sample where, and this is harder than it sounds, I have TV writer colleagues who, you forget this when you're doing a first pass on a script. 2 characters in a scene where each person is a human being who wants something. That's huge. And then there's dialogue. So it's not just about snappy banter and I can do snappy banter. It's much more can I write two human beings who can talk to each other, and it's different at the end of the scene than it was at the beginning. That's huge. And just, thirding Twine, the thing that's great about it, and I didn't have to build anything in it until I had to do this sample for Fox, I guess in late 2017, I guess it was. Coming from different bespoke dialogue tools, it was a little frustrating for me. I was used to scripting in a different way, but having to script it myself, designing variables, which means you know how to design a choice, which is huge to me. Even if you just have 3 binary choices in like a 3-minute click-through Twine game, that's huge to me, where I can say, oh, the player can take a drink to steady their nerves or not, and then I'm gonna see the knockdown effects of that. And then later there's gonna be another person comes into the room and the way that they choose to behave with that person, and I see the knockdown effects of that. That's huge to me, because being able to design even just a binary choice and see the effect of that, then it shows to me that the writer really has a deep understanding of how the player might want to change the game.
One real quick last thing. Having samples full of original stuff is definitely good. You want to have that, but especially for me, hiring people who are essentially going to match voice. A lot of the jobs that you're going to get early on are not going to be jobs where you're the only writer creating a story. It's going to be you matching the tone and voice of another game, or something that a creative director is leading, or a narrative director. So you want to have some samples that feel current, that feel like they're in a popular enough game that hopefully those people have played it, so that they can read it and look at it and say, well, even if it's not the game that we're working on, ideally it is, but I can see that they can match God of War or Red Dead. Like, this could go straight into that game, so it stands to reason they could help us and work with us as a supporting writer.
Working conditions in video games, which it will be the thing that eventually forces the video game industry to unionize. It was like that in Hollywood. They would expect people to be on set for 19, 20 hours back in the 30s and 40s.
So what's happening right now with reality and unscripted and television, it's definitely one of those things. They're going to start out and get as much juice out of that turnip as they can.
Corporations are not people, right? I mean, I know Mitt Romney's famous for saying corporations are people, friend, but they're not people, and they will take and take and take and take and take as much as you will give. And so I worked on a game there for 3 years. Everybody was working 80 to 100-hour weeks. And
are you working against a deadline that has been imposed upon you? And is that something that is arbitrary based on a marketing decision, or is it specific based on a production timeline?
Yes and yes. They made the game, and then they didn't like it, and so they decided to make it again, and then they didn't like it, and they decided to make it again. And each time, somebody from marketing had said, we're releasing on July 4th, make sure you're ready to go. And so they raced, and they got to like June 1st, and then went, this is terrible, let's start over again. So they started over again, and then shifted the date by another year. And when you look at the ads that are online for the game versus the game that came out, there's some elements that are the same, but a lot of it's not the same. That game was LA Noire. Go to YouTube and look at the ads for the very first announcements of the game versus what eventually came out. They remade it 3 times, and they worked everybody at that studio to death. And then when the game came out, basically Rockstar was like, we're not happy with it, we're not happy with the sales of it, so we're shutting down your studio. So those people worked themselves to death for nothing, really.
Is there a way for any of you to characterize sort of a typical game arc, like from the time you're hired until the game delivers or whatever point you're released? Just sort of generally what that looks like from a timetable standpoint? Or is it different based on AAA, not AAA? Is it based on budget? What's going on?
Yeah, definitely. And their type of game where it's serialized is way different than like a thing where it like ships. Like they had to hit monthly deadlines, and like you guys knew that everybody's expecting chapter 7 of this in like 3 weeks or whatever. So that must have been.
I'm like sweating
much
right
closer
now
to
as you're
TV.
saying those words.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so funny. So I know Pierre obviously for years, and Harrison, who some of you might have been at the 2 panels he's talked on so far. He was also there. We didn't cross paths. But it's so weird that whenever we get together, we always talk about it because it is such a, here's the thing, right? The games at Telltale started with the writing, right? So the first chunks of things that were done was the story, it was the writing. And then it would go to the chore artists, essentially the animators, and then it would move on to other departments from there, you know. So everyone sort of could work and they could do their work, but writing was also a big bottleneck. So everyone crunched super hard sort of all the time, but also, I mean, we were talking about this last night. If we had put a scene in that we wanted to make better, you are sort of fighting that impulse in yourself, which is a good impulse, that you want to ship something amazing. You see a spot where it fell off, you see a spot that's not as good as it could be, or as cool as it could be, and you do want to take another pass, or you have to completely change the story, which creates a ton of knock-on work for everybody else at the studio. So it's that impulse, which is the desire to make something really cool and innovative and exciting, that gets you to crunch, that gets you to agree to crunch. However, that doesn't change the fact that I spent a year in crunch on Minecraft, and it was not great. It was really not great.
You guys are all familiar with the phrase crunch time, right? Yeah, okay.
I do think some of it's...
I think California's gonna sue soon. There's gonna be an attorney general in California that like sues a game company and like
Blows it
nails them
open.
for millions of dollars,
Yeah.
and bludgeon them into stopping it.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to assess as a writer because I sort of feel like I occasionally procrastinate and I force crunch on myself, or I take on
Every writer.
an extra draft, you know. So I think it is about getting in there and seeing what feels healthy and trying to stay healthy, as sort of vague as that sounds. And I think for potentially younger people, that's you got more energy than we do, and maybe it takes that to get into the industry, and then you get in, you start to change it from the inside. But as much as we make it sound like it's the worst thing, I mean, my time at Telltale was is the best, most traumatic thing I've ever
Right, right. We have time.
And I'll talk about television writers' rooms in this case too. I think like because I came from theater, so it was just me as the playwright, which it's a blessing and a curse. It's wonderful because you're controlling everything, but it doesn't exist until you bring on collaborators, until it gets produced, and until you bring on designers and a director and actors. It's not really a thing, and then it becomes allowing yourself to not be the only person who has the answers. And I think one of the great things about TV, where everything is broken in a group, and I wish some more of the model had extended to the way that Telltale operated, was because we break the story as a group, and because we put all the cards on the board, and we've talked about all those cards, and one writer has written the outline and one writer writes the episode, but I can call any writer on Get Shorty and say, hey, I'm struggling with this scene. What was this beat that turns things? What is this thing? And does that affect your scene later? And I have 4 other people who can say, oh yeah, okay, well what if you did this? Well, what if you did this? And it's an amazing release of the burden. So I think like to not have to be the one who has to fix all the problems, it's absolutely an adjustment from being I am the sole individual and the sort of sole creator, to be able to turn it over to a group of people and say, I mean, this is the last time Pierre and I worked together on the 3rd season of Walking Dead. We lost an act of an episode for scope, a whole act, a whole 3rd act. So then it was about, okay, well 2 is already being written, 2 is already being chored and designed and having art made for it and all that. So how do we sort of come together, put our heads together and say, okay, what is the least disruptive thing we can do and still make a really cool story? And that was actually great. That was the best part of it, to not be the person alone in a room sort of typing words into a tool. It was having the other people around to say, help me, how do we do this?
Today's panelists are representatives from Skillshot Media, and will discuss how their company produces esports events around the globe. Please join me in welcoming SCAD writing student and public relations manager Kat DeShields, esports manager Graham Hadfield, and broadcast designer Brad Weir. Thank you.
I'm with Lost Tribe Esports. We plan esports tournaments for Jewish teens, tweens, and young adults. So my question for all three of you, across departments at Skillshot, what kind of considerations are taken for people under the age of 18?
Do you mean like as they're playing, like as players?
As players, in, in training, you talk about full-time jobs for someone who's 15, 16, 40 hours a week. How do you work with their school schedules? How do you deal with parents? There's a lot that goes into, especially legally, when you're talking about people under the age of 18.
So we've recently only just changed our league this year with one of our main staple games, because we're from Hi-Res Studios. This is where we're a branch of Hi-Res that has gone off on its own to do just production for video games. But Smite specifically and Paladins, which are the two main titles Hi-Res have within the esports scene, have always been with the students and supported them in terms of like the games were always played online. We've made a very small change just recently, that's the pro level of play is all in-house at the studio now this year. There is no age limit on it, but I do know the sponsors of the organizations have we've kind of put a soft lock on like 16 or under 16s. We're not allowing them to come to an extent, more to do with them being young and moving away from home and doing this and not going to school. We do support them behind the scenes though. We're trying to help them with the schooling system of getting further education if they so choose.
Yeah, I think most of the time 16 is usually the age limit. Online stuff, they could be a little bit more flexible for it to go younger. If it ever has anything to come to like LAN or an event, they usually will push that to 18 for a lot of games. But we try to open it up to as young as possible because that's where the future of esports is. So to like just block them out is just not really fair because that's what the audience is. As far as like working and stuff like that, we don't hire anybody under 18 from my knowledge, and I think that I don't know if that's legal reasons or what it is, but I think that it comes from an experience thing more than less to make sure that people are going to be mature enough and have the schedule and opportunities to do stuff, because when we hire people, the hours can get really long and things like that. So if we have somebody who's underage and we can only, they can only work for a certain amount of hours, then that makes it really hard for us to put on a show if the show is going 12, 14 hours long. We don't want to trade somebody out, in a position in the middle of the show. So I think that kind of pushes you to the age limit of like, hey, you got to be over this age so that you can work extended hours if needed, and you can work every day of the week depending on what the position is. I think
the major thing about the hours for like gaming of how the esports take place, most of the tournaments and things that are run online from most scenes are always at evenings and weekends, specifically so that it's not interfering with educational purposes for children on a day-to-day basis, but that's most scenes in general, except the pro level of play.
Yeah, and we do work a lot with different organizations that facilitate to a younger crowd. So a lot of it is, education opportunities, the kind of games that you can play. Of course, we champion Smite and Paladins, but we have a partnership with Play Versus for the high school level. We have a partnership with NACE, the National Association of Collegiate Esports, for college level. We're about to do a CSGO tournament with them. Previously, we had one for Smite and Paladins with $50,000 worth of scholarships for each. So getting people involved in esports, recognizing the opportunity, like letting them grow up in it, is a large part of what we do from the local partnership standpoint, and trying to, just spread the word about what's out there.
Yeah, so I think it's coming up. We've come up with these partners that do it on the lower level, and then we try to build the players up so that when they get as of age, they can play at a pro level. So because we don't want to just pull somebody out of school and be like, hey, you're a pro gamer now and you didn't finish high school.